Catherine Nevin's case involves the death of her husband, 55-year-old Tom Nevin, who was shot and killed in his pub, Jack White's, near Arklow, in the early hours of March 19th last year. He died from a single shotgun wound to his side while counting the weekend earnings after the St. Patrick's holiday. His car was taken from the scene during the robbery, but was later found abandoned at Dartmouth Square in Dublin. Today, investigators took Mr. Nevin's widow, Catherine, into custody while she was in Dublin. She was arrested around lunchtime in the Bilibbo area and brought to the Bridewell Garda station, where she was charged with her husband's murder and with attempting to persuade others to kill him in 1989 and 1990. Shortly after, she was brought before Judge Michael Canalan at the nearby Dublin District Court. Catherine Nevin, born Lee Scully on October 1, 1950, grew up in the small village of Nerney in County Kildare. She was raised in a modest two-bedroom home with her brother and sister and attended Presentation College, Kildare, an all-girls school run by nuns. A strong student, Catherine was recognized for her hard work and skilled hands. After finishing school, she purchased sewing machines and traveled around the country teaching dressmaking. She later moved into the beauty industry, completing a makeup course and giving lectures on makeup and presentation, where she showcased her impressive teaching abilities. Catherine's first major job was as a receptionist at Dublin's oldest hotel, the Castle Hotel. Colleagues remembered her as extremely capable, stylish, and driven, with ambitions of opening her own modeling agency. In 1971, at just 21 years old, she met Tom Nevin, a frequent guest at the hotel who was 10 years older than she was. Their relationship developed quickly, and the couple married in Rome in 1976. Tom, originally from the village of Tina in County Galway, was a reserved, down-to-earth man with considerable financial means. The eldest of 9 children, he had a strong passion for sports, particularly hurling. His relaxed, personable nature paired well with Catherine's determination. At the time of their marriage, Tom was managing his uncle's pub in Dolphin's Barn, Dublin. Over the years, the couple acquired and ran numerous properties across Dublin, with Catherine playing an active role in decorating them and overseeing rent collection. In March 1986, Tom and Catherine purchased Jack White's pub in Britta's Bay, County Wicklow, the setting of this story. They devoted themselves to the business, operating the pub from 8:30 a.m. until late each night. Britta's Bay, a 4-kilometer stretch of sandy coastline along the Irish Sea, is a popular destination for Dublin residents and one of the capital's most visited beaches during the summer months. The acquisition of Jack White's pub and restaurant proved highly profitable for the Nevins. However, it was here that Catherine's true character began to surface, and the couple's marriage started to unravel. Catherine developed a reputation for being domineering and intimidating, often behaving abusively toward both Tom and the young employees. Although a few people viewed her as somewhat maternal, most agreed she was extremely difficult to work for. She frequently humiliated Tom in front of the staff and regularly scolded her young workers, many of whom later spoke out about her behavior. One former staff member recounted a particularly petty incident. After closing one night, Tom and the staff were relaxing, chatting, and sharing a laugh. When Catherine entered the bar and disapproved of the scene, she seized the staff's tip jar, a move seen as unnecessarily spiteful. Tom was affectionately called Daddy by the staff. Tall, gentle, and soft-spoken, he stood 6 feet 3 inches and was known for his kindness. The employees adored him, and he often went out of his way to support them. Catherine, however, maintained strict and absolute control over the workplace. One staff member recalled that her harshness and lack of empathy verged on inhumane. Kathleen, one of the cleaners, was frequently instructed to return early to redo rooms she had already finished. On another occasion, when Catherine asked her to work full-time and Kathleen declined, Catherine retaliated by reporting her to social welfare authorities, claiming she had refused full-time employment, which jeopardized Kathleen's eligibility for benefits. Her actions were seen as both petty and vindictive. By 1986, Catherine and Tom were essentially no longer living as husband and wife. Tom stayed in the staff quarters, while Catherine occupied the main bedroom, where she openly entertained male visitors just a few doors from where Tom slept, a situation that was deeply disrespectful to him. Although Catherine repeatedly asked for a divorce, Tom refused. Having already annulled his first marriage and guided by his Catholic upbringing, he was unwilling to face another marital failure. Had Tom agreed to the divorce, he might have been spared not only the humiliation he endured in front of staff, friends, and customers, but possibly his life as well. Between 1989 and 1991, Catherine desperately wanted to end the marriage, making no fewer than 18 requests to have her husband killed. She stood to benefit greatly from his death, as she would inherit the pub worth £670,000, their 2 Dublin properties worth $1 million at the time, and a £78,000 payout from an insurance policy, along with £197,000 Irish pounds in cash. Catherine was not only all I've said above, but she was also a bit of a whore, as we would call her here in Ireland. She had men left, right, and center with no shame, and she loved men in high-profile jobs. If someone high-profile visited Jack White's, she would fall over herself as she was a bit of a sex kitten and used her sexuality to her advantage, with short skirts, low tops, and high heels. On Tuesday, March 19, 1996, Tom and Catherine were to celebrate their 10th anniversary of owning Jack White's pub. It was just after Paddy's weekend, so the pub was extra busy. Tom didn't get the chance to go to the bank, and on the Tuesday evening, he was downstairs in the kitchen of the pub, counting the weekend's takings, while Catherine was asleep upstairs. According to Catherine, she was awoken by someone pressing her face into a pillow, and a man was shouting, "Jewelry, kill you," with a knife in his hand. Catherine was then tied up by her attacker. After a while, she heard 2 vehicles speeding away. She managed to get to a panic button, and the guards arrived around 4:30 a.m. They found Tom slumped on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood with a gunshot to his chest, still wearing his glasses and a pen in his hand. He was surely dead. A sum of 13,000 Irish pounds, equivalent to €16,500 today, was stolen along with Tom's car, which would later be found in Dublin City, abandoned. It looked like a robbery gone wrong, but despite Catherine's story, there were no signs of a forced entry, and the phone cords had not been pulled out of the walls, but 2 were off the hook. Catherine's bedroom was in a state of disorder, but it did not appear to have been systematically searched, and jewelry had been scattered around, but none was taken. From the time of the shooting, it would take Catherine a total of 2 hours before she pressed the alarm button to alert authorities of the break-in. She would greet the guards scantily clad and tell them she had been tied up with her own black tights, and her underwear had been thrust into her mouth as a gag. A guard fingerprint expert found drawers scattered on the floor, which appeared to have been lifted from the sides and placed on the ground. None of the doors and windows in the pub showed signs of forced entry. She had not gone to her husband's separate bedroom for help once she had freed herself. A witness would recall how on the day of the murder, Catherine had told staff they were not welcome to stay there that night in the pub, as they had often done after a night out, especially after a bank holiday weekend. While many of the circumstances seemed suspicious, and the Gardaí were confident they had their killer, there was still a lack of firm evidence, no forensics, no eyewitnesses, and no admission of guilt. Circumstantial evidence would not be enough to convict her. However, while they built their case, Catherine would play the grieving widow to a T, all dressed in black, carrying a single red rose and lapping up the sympathy poured from family, friends, and people who knew them through their businesses. Catherine even installed a huge headstone at Tom's grave site with writings of poetry inscribed, showing her love for Tom. She even took out an advertisement in a local newspaper that spoke of her devotion to Tom. It would take until April 1997 for Catherine to be arrested, shortly after she had sold the pub for £500,000. When she was later charged with murder and solicitation to murder, she had already become one of the most widely discussed and recognizable individuals in the country. Later, Tom's family would petition the courts to freeze all assets until the conclusion of the trial, including the proceeds from the pub's sale. In 2000, the first trial collapsed when it became known that the jury's deliberations had been overheard. The second trial was delayed when Catherine was hospitalized, but resumed a few days later. Catherine pleaded not guilty, and as the prosecution had only circumstantial evidence, they heavily relied on the testimony of 3 specific witnesses. Between 1989 and 1991, Catherine had approached these three men, who became the key witnesses for the prosecution. The first man was William McLean, a self-admitted smuggler from County Monaghan, who was among the initial barmen employed at Jack White's pub when the Nevins acquired it. He was also Catherine's first known extramarital companion, and he claimed to have been compensated solely through her kindness. Years later, he received a phone call from Catherine, informing him that she was hospitalized following a heart attack. However, it was in fact a cosmetic surgery procedure. She offered him £20,000 and the prospect of rekindling their relationship if he agreed to kill Tom. His response was a firm refusal. The second man was John Jones, a former member of the political party Sinn Féin, who ran an advice clinic at the back of his shop in Dublin. She had offered to host meetings in the pub to gain favor with the IRA. She visited his shop one day and directly requested that he have the IRA kill Tom. Jones thought she was joking and refused. A few weeks later, she would return with the same plan, but Jones would decline again. She even showed up at his business premises, bruised and bandaged, claiming that Tom had assaulted her. In fact, she had undergone cosmetic surgery again, as it seems our Catherine was fond of such procedures in the past. Eventually, she got the message and stopped asking. The third of these witnesses was Jerry Heaps, a former member of the Provisional Irish Republican Army, and he worked for John Jones in his shop. It was Jones who had originally introduced Jerry to Catherine. She approached him at least 10 times, asking him to help her kill Tom. Then she suggested to him that Tom could be killed during one of his weekly visits to the flats he owned, as it would be an opportune moment, since he would have the pub takings with him. Every time Jerry refused, she would come up with another idea. One of these involved ambushing him after having a meal out with Catherine. He told her he couldn't do that because the bulk of the shot would pass through him and hit her. Catherine's response to this was that it would look great if Tom was to die in her arms. Jerry said no once again. Catherine also would have an affair with Guard Inspector Tom Kennedy, an affair he would deny in court. This affair began in 1991. Several staff members would say in court that Kennedy was a frequent visitor to the pub, and one staff member said she had seen him and Catherine in bed together on several occasions. Kennedy would say that Tom was his friend and he was the only reason he went to the pub. But Tom would say different to one of his staff the morning after a retirement party that was held at the pub for Kennedy, where Catherine would gift him paid flights to New York to visit his children, a very generous gift on Catherine's part. Kennedy would go on to say to the Gardaí that Catherine was the type of woman who would give you a pain in the head when she started getting on about things. He said he was aware of the rumors of him and Catherine having an affair, but that he was over 60 and that sex would not be a concern of his. Next, we have Judge Dominic Abuakala, who was introduced to Catherine by Tom Kennedy. Abuakala said he too had an affair with her, which he also denied, just like Kennedy. It was also stated that he had his own key to the pub and would let himself in and out at all hours of the night. Allegedly, Tom was very upset by this affair, according to staff members, and he would frequently argue with Catherine over it. Catherine would later go on to deny these affairs in court. On the day before Tom's murder, Monday the 18th of March, the bar and lounge saw steady customer traffic. The only unusual occurrence that day was a visit by a strange man wearing a long overcoat and carrying a bag. This man then went to make a phone call, and one of the staff said he was muttering into the phone. He spoke to Tom, and the staff presumed Tom knew him, given the nature of their conversation. This man was not seen leaving the pub that day, and it is possible that he did not leave, but instead hid in the pub and later, in fact, shot Tom. Also, after Tom died and Catherine was under investigation for his murder, there was no objection to oppose her taking on the license of the public house exclusively. The Judge Dominic Abuakala would be the one to grant her the license in his private chambers. Another theory was that Catherine herself was the one who pulled the trigger, as she was the only one in the pub that night. Tom did not appear to act defensively immediately prior to it. He still had his glasses on his nose, and his pen was in his hand when the guards found him. He would not have been unduly surprised by her arrival in the kitchen. While there was no evidence of firearm residue found on her clothing, they only tested the clothes she was wearing on that night. But she could have changed her clothes before she tied herself up. After all, She had 2 hours before she got help. She also admitted to washing her hands before their arrival. In another scenario, Catherine would have had to be assisted by an accomplice who tied her hands and took the money, the gun, and the car to Dublin. The other theory is that Catherine helped one or more people to carry out the killing. The trial of the notorious Black Widow, as she was dubbed, captivated the nation from start to finish, and she quickly became one of the country's most high-profile killers. She assassinated Tom's character by claiming he was abusive and alcoholic. Despite Catherine's continuously glamorous appearance and impeccable grooming, her tight-lipped expression and stubborn chin, along with her apparent determination to appear matronly rather than seductive, could not be concealed. Her appearance was part of the extensive web of lies she had constructed to shield herself. The media reported on Catherine's appearance, from her clothes, her hair and makeup, and even down to her nail polish. In court, it became such a problem that Judge Carney put a ban on the press reporting on her appearance. After a gripping 42-day trial, the jury of 6 men and 6 women deliberated for a record 5 days before she was found guilty in April 2000 for paying a hitman to murder her husband and for soliciting 3 men to do the same. She received life in prison. 3 years later, Catherine was back in court trying to get her case overturned. The Court of Criminal Appeal said, however, that it was satisfied there was nothing in the new material that could have come to light that could have assisted in Catherine's defense, and so it was dismissed. In 2010, she had another miscarriage of justice appeal dismissed. In 2014, she was denied in her bid to appeal her murder conviction to the Supreme Court. Tom had not made a will, and Catherine and he never had any children, so she was to inherit everything. Tom's mother had effectively frozen Tom's estate, including the proceeds from the sale of the pub. The application of probate by Catherine was still pending on the results of the trial, and when she was found guilty, she lost any claim to the estate. Tom's mother had also initiated legal proceedings to try and have her disinherited. She died a year before Catherine had been convicted of her son's murder, and her case was taken over by her son Patrick and daughter Margaret. They believed they should be allowed to rely on her conviction as part of their legal action, and the Supreme Court agreed. So basically, Catherine got absolutely nothing when she was found guilty. In September 2016, Catherine was admitted to the hospital and was later diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor. She stayed there for 3 days and was granted a reviewable temporary release (RTR) to receive treatment. On November 7, 2016, she was transferred to an acute post-care unit while undergoing medical treatment. She remained there until August 2017, when she again received an RTR for pre-release and resocialization. She was provided with supportive accommodation and stayed there until she was rehospitalized on November 6, 2017. In December 2017, she was moved to a hospice care facility, where she remained until her death in February 2018. She was 67 years old. Catherine protected her innocence until the end. Despite being convicted of murder by a jury, she insisted that this was not conclusive proof of her guilt. Additionally, she never revealed who had assisted her in killing Tom. Kim and Scott Richardson had a happy marriage, and their love and commitment brought their firstborn Skylar into the world on March 9, 1999. Later, they welcomed Jackson. Both children grew up in a peaceful environment. Weekends were family bonding times at home. Neighbors often saw them in their backyard, where Kim and Scott would grill food and work in the garden. Skylar and Jackson enjoyed playing with the family dogs, their laughter filling the air. Family celebrations, including birthdays, holidays, and graduations, took place around bonfires in the yard, which had witnessed countless joyful moments. It was a refuge of peace. No one could have imagined that in this backyard, amidst the Richardson family's happiness, an unutterable secret was buried. As Skylar grew older, weight and diet, issues that sometimes hide behind a seemingly perfect facade, played a central role in her life. These concerns became her obsession, leading to unexpected and painful situations. For Kim, the impact of these issues was undeniable. Her worry began in Skylar's early adolescence when her daughter already showed signs of eating disorders. At 12 years old, Skylar was obsessed with calories, refusing to buy gum because it added 5 calories to her diet. She attended high school in Ohio, excelling as a cheerleader. Being a cheerleader required her to be small and agile, traits she had, making her a perfect flyer. This role involved performing aerial stunts and holding complex poses for a few seconds before returning to the ground. However, the pressure to stay thin marked the beginning of Skylar's struggle with her weight. Her obsession with not gaining even a gram led to dangerous behaviors like induced vomiting. But when the cheerleading season ended, Skylar would binge eat. She then subjected herself to severe fasting periods. Discussing her weight was a taboo topic in the family, and Skylar's extremely reserved nature made addressing the issue difficult. The Richardsons sought professional help, including doctors, therapists, and nutritionists, but no intervention seemed to ease her suffering. Skylar was diagnosed with body dysmorphia, a disorder characterized by an obsession with perceived physical flaws. Amid her dissatisfaction with herself, she became increasingly reserved and kept numerous secrets, deeply worrying her parents. However, from the outside, everything seemed perfect at home. Skylar was seen as a beautiful and popular young woman during her high school years, excelling as a cheerleader and radiating vitality and joy in her school community. Her younger brother Jackson was on the football team at the same school, which contributed to the Richardson family's reputation as exemplary. In late July 2016, just before her senior year of high school, Skylar started a relationship with a friend's cousin, but it ended quickly. However, in January 2017, she found a new love, Brandon, a junior at her school. Skylar seemed happy and even appeared to be gaining weight, which gave her family hope. This change suggested that Skylar had her eating disorder under control. Her choice of a form-fitting dress for prom and her healthy appearance increased her parents' confidence in her well-being. In March, Skylar even went on a family vacation, wearing a 2-piece bikini showing some curves. Skylar and Brandon's relationship seemed to be going well, and her mother's concerns led her to address a sensitive topic, pregnancy. Kim wanted Skylar to take measures to protect herself, so she took her to the gynecologist in April. At this point, Skylar was 18 years old, so she went into the exam room alone. What should have been a routine visit for a contraceptive prescription turned traumatic for Skylar. Her tears as she left the office indicated something troubling, but Kim assumed it was due to it being her first visit, which can be emotional and somewhat invasive for a reserved girl like her daughter. Little did her mother know that the cause of her tears was a shocking revelation. The doctor informed Skylar that she was pregnant, and not just newly pregnant. She was already 8 months along. Skylar desperately asked the doctor to keep the secret as her parents couldn't know. 9 days after the gynecologist visit on May 5, 2017, Skylar attended prom with Brandon. Despite being in her advanced pregnancy, her form-fitting dress fit her surprisingly well. It's worth noting that she had tried on the same dress in February, and it fit the same 3 months later. Apparently, she hadn't gained any weight in those 90 days, which is highly unusual for someone so far along in pregnancy. Perhaps that's why no one noticed the secret that was about to change her life forever. Less than 48 hours after attending prom, nature took its course, and it was time for the baby to be born. In the early hours of May 7th, Skylar gave birth to a small baby girl in the bathroom of the Richardson home. The newborn, apparently lifeless, became a dark secret that Skylar feared her parents would discover. In a panic, she decided to bury the baby in the backyard of their home. No one knew about this incident. In the weeks that followed, Skylar continued her life, outwardly acting as if nothing had happened. She didn't tell anyone about the tragic event that haunted her. In July 2017, she visited her gynecologist again and asked for a contraceptive prescription. As expected, the doctor asked what had happened with her pregnancy. She replied that her baby had been stillborn and that she had buried the body in the backyard of her family's home. Unbeknownst to her, revealing this secret set justice in motion, the police received a concerning call from a doctor who reported that after a gynecology and obstetrics consultation, a patient had given birth at home and buried the baby in the backyard. This call triggered a series of events that shook the Richardson family to its core. Kim and Scott were taken aback when the police arrived at their door on July 14, 2017. It was a sunny summer day, and Skylar was at her grandmother's pool, enjoying happy moments with her boyfriend and cousins. She had no idea they were coming for her. The family was entirely unaware of the gravity of the situation when the police contacted them. According to Scott's later statements, the police assured them that they only wanted to talk to Skylar about something she might have witnessed and insisted she was not in any trouble. Trusting those words, Scott took his daughter to the police station without proper legal representation, an action he would later consider one of the biggest mistakes of his life. On that same July 14th, when Scott accompanied his daughter to the police station, he had no idea that she had been hiding such a dark secret. At the station, the officers asked him to wait outside since Skylar was an adult. Inside an interrogation room, a police officer read Skylar her rights and began pressuring her to reveal what had happened with her baby. The family was about to face a crisis that would impact their lives in unimaginable ways. In the small interrogation room, Skylar finally shared the truth with the investigators. In the early hours of May 7th, Skylar faced the unimaginable alone in her bathroom. She gave birth to a baby who showed no signs of life. She held the newborn for hours, hoping for a miracle that never came. Resigned to the heartbreaking reality and ensuring not to wake her family, she quietly buried her daughter in a makeshift grave in their backyard using a small garden trowel. During a tense interrogation that followed, the investigator eventually disclosed to Skylar's parents, Scott and Kim, the grave reason for their daughter's questioning. Shocked by the news and unable to comprehend how they had missed the signs of her pregnancy, they listened as Skylar shared the baby's name, Annabelle, and revealed the brief relationship with the father, a cousin of a friend from the previous summer. This revelation devastated her mother, Kim, who later expressed her anguish over the pain Skylar had endured alone. As the family absorbed this new reality, investigators were already moving towards their home to dig deeper into the case. Unbeknownst to them, the small town quickly buzzed with the news as police activity spiked in an area unaccustomed to such attention, drawing national media to the story of the troubled young cheerleader. That same day, authorities exhumed the remains of baby Annabelle for forensic examination. After enduring over 5 hours of grueling questions at the station, Skylar and her parents were allowed to go home. However, the respite was short-lived. 6 days later, the investigators returned with unsettling news from the autopsy. There were signs of charring on Annabelle's bones, suggesting she had been burned, which led them to suspect homicidal violence. On July 20th, 2017, during a second intense interview without her legal or parental support, Skylar was directly accused by police of killing and burning her baby. Throughout the interview, she steadfastly refuted the allegations, denying any use of heat or fire 17 times, and insisting 29 times that Annabelle was stillborn, maintaining her innocence against the grave charges laid before her. Under the intense pressure of the interrogation, Skylar eventually changed her story, admitting that she might have partially burned the baby's body. When asked if the baby had made any noises at birth, she hesitantly mentioned that there might have been a sound. After an hour of intense questioning, the detectives decided they had enough to arrest her and charged her with reckless homicide, suspecting the baby had suffocated. Skylar was released on bail, but this was just the beginning of her legal battles. The prosecutor publicly laid out the charges: aggravated murder, which could lead to a life sentence, involuntary manslaughter, child endangerment, and abuse of a corpse. He argued that Skylar's actions were driven by her family's desire to maintain a perfect facade. Despite these heavy accusations, Skylar's parents, Kim and Scott, remained determined to clear her name with the help of their lawyers. Scott voiced his frustration over how the police had misled them from the beginning, telling them Skylar wasn't in trouble, only to detain her and search their home for evidence once they brought her to the station. Kim described the ordeal as a nightmare, noting how Skylar's arrest reignited her struggles with eating disorders and psychological stress. The legal drama attracted intense media scrutiny and public speculation, resulting in a gag order. Although by then, the Richardsons were already facing widespread criticism and hostility. Online and outside their home, the family endured harsh criticism, protests, and threats, feeling under constant surveillance and harassed by people who distorted their images online. Amid this turmoil, They hired experienced defense attorneys who contended that Skylar's confession was coerced. The case took a twist when the pathologist who initially reported charring on the baby's remains withdrew her statement, confirming there was no evidence of burning. Despite this new evidence, the prosecutor stood firm on the charges, insisting on the validity of Skylar's initial admissions during the interrogation. However, the defense succeeded in getting Skylar placed under house arrest. At home, surrounded by books and her dogs, she tried to find some peace under a pine tree where her parents had placed an angel ornament at the burial site of her baby, whom she called Angel. In a reflective interview, Scott explained that from Skylar's perspective, she was handling the sudden and tragic event the best she could, believing the baby was stillborn. He detailed how she tenderly placed the baby in the ground and marked the spot with a flower. As time passed, her dreams of attending the University of Cincinnati had to be put on hold. The uncertainty of her future weighed heavily on her and her family. However, the prosecution viewed this as her undergoing the justice process that was deemed necessary, aiming to seek justice for the baby. The case itself was fraught with tension and division. Kim, Skylar's mother, voiced her frustrations with the legal process, feeling that the defense's points were completely disregarded by the prosecution, which she found to be exceedingly cold and dismissive. The prosecution maintained that an innocent life had been unjustly taken, and it was their duty to seek reparation. In July 2019, the case took an unexpected turn when the prosecutor offered Skylar a deal: drop the aggravated murder charge if she pleaded guilty to the remaining charges, thus avoiding a trial but still facing up to 15 years in prison. This proposal brought immense anguish to the Richardson family, but ultimately the decision rested with Skylar. On one decisive Sunday morning, Skylar resolved not to plead guilty to crimes she maintained she did not commit. She chose to let a jury decide her fate at trial. 2 years after the distressing events, the trial began on September 3, 2019. The prosecution started with a startling revelation, quoting a text message from Skylar to her mother that exposed her troubled emotional state shortly after she secretly gave birth and buried the baby in the backyard. The prosecution also displayed a selfie Skylar had taken at the gym that same day, using these pieces to argue that Skylar had no intention of keeping the baby. Although proving the baby was born alive was a challenge, the prosecution contended that Skylar's own admissions during interrogation supported their case. Witnesses for the prosecution testified that Skylar had seen the baby's arms move and heard her make sounds, suggesting life. They also claimed Skylar might have inadvertently harmed the baby. Moreover, they accused her of trying to burn the baby's remains. Trey Johnson, presented as the baby's father, testified about their brief relationship and the unprotected sexual encounters they had. When it was time for the defense, Skylar's lawyers argued that she had been subjected to overly aggressive questioning, leading to a coerced confession. They disputed the assumption that she had attempted to burn her baby, noting that the forensic expert who initially supported this claim had later withdrawn it. They presented evidence of Skylar's significant weight fluctuations due to her long-standing battle with anorexia, which they claimed was exacerbated by her mother's pressure to remain thin. During the trial, the doctor who performed the autopsy testified that the baby died from homicidal violence of undetermined origin. Yet, under cross-examination, she admitted there was no physical evidence to support a live birth, or that Skylar had directly caused harm to her child. Witnesses for the prosecution also acknowledged the lack of physical evidence of a live birth, with no trauma or burns found on the baby's remains. The defense stressed that the only evidence suggesting a live birth came from Skylar's statements, which they argued were the result of coercion by the police. An obstetrician also testified that he didn't believe the baby was alive at birth. He noted that the umbilical cord wasn't cut, which might mean it came off before or during delivery. He also mentioned how Skylar described the baby as extremely pale, not looking like a healthy newborn. He suggested that Skylar's eating disorder might have limited the baby's growth in the womb, possibly leading to a stillbirth or death shortly after birth. An expert on police questioning explained that some interrogation techniques can push people into false confessions, especially those who are more vulnerable to pressure. A clinical psychologist who talked to Skylar found she has a dependent personality disorder, which could make her more likely to give in to authority figures. The trial moved forward with both sides presenting their arguments and evidence. The defense attorney emphasized that Schuyler is innocent until proven guilty, urging the jury to stand by her if they had any doubts about the baby's condition at birth. The prosecution argued that Schuyler had ended a life to keep up appearances and should be held accountable. The trial was intense, and eventually the jury had to decide Schuyler's fate. On September 12, 2019, after 4 hours, they ruled she wasn't guilty of the most serious charges, but did find her guilty of improperly handling the baby's remains, which could mean up to a year in jail. The Richardson family was relieved by the verdict but had to wait until sentencing. The next day, Schuyler spoke publicly for the first time in court, expressing regret and apologizing for the pain caused by her actions. During a victim impact statement, Trey Johnson's mother spoke about her deep loss, saying no words could fully express her anguish over her granddaughter Annabelle's death. The judge believed different choices by Schuyler could have saved her daughter, but sentenced her to 3 years of probation instead of a harsher penalty. The trial and its aftermath deeply affected Schuyler and her family, causing her significant stress and health issues. 2 months after being mostly acquitted, Schuyler shared her feelings in an interview with Cosmopolitan magazine. She talked about her regrets and the burden of guilt she carries every day for not opening up sooner about her situation. She described the period as devastating and admitted to struggling with depression since the incident. Schuyler shared that she named her baby Annabelle because she didn't know anyone else with that name. She visits Annabelle's grave every week to leave pink flowers and finds a bit of peace knowing her baby is at rest. During an interview, Schuyler opened up about how the trial almost broke her and even made her think about ending her life. She admitted that living with the truth was incredibly hard, especially when it felt like everyone else thought differently. She also felt like she lost a part of herself during the trial and was scared that people saw her as guilty because of all the news coverage. Trey, Annabelle's dad, told the media that he was shocked by the case because he didn't know about the pregnancy beforehand. It hit him hard when he found out months later in 2018, especially learning about it through social media when everything went public. Trey's family deeply felt the loss, and after the trial, they gathered to mark 2 years since Annabelle's passing. This whole situation really affected everyone involved. They all dealt with a lot of emotions no matter how the court ruled. Over time, Schuyler got help for her eating disorders, went to college, and worked at the law firm that represented her. Her probation ended almost 2 years early in 2020. The judge decided there was no need to keep an eye on her since the crime wasn't severe. She had no prior offenses, and she was busy with work and school. In Schuyler's first TV interview, her parents talked about how the case impacted them and their daughter. They mentioned a special angel marker at Annabelle's grave site, expressing how heartbreaking it all was, and how sometimes being near the grave brought them a little comfort. They also revealed that Schuyler was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, suffering from frequent panic attacks and nightmares that often kept her from sleeping in her own room. In 2022, Schuyler's lawyers tried to seal the court records of her conviction to help her move on, arguing that the public didn't need to see them anymore. But the prosecutors disagreed, saying it would lessen how serious her actions were. The judge ultimately decided to restrict access to the records, siding with Schuyler's need for privacy, which stirred up new debates. Case of Liga Scrimen. India is the only country in the world where cultural and religious traditions have not been interrupted since ancient times, which is probably why it attracts tourists from all over the planet. But in our story, we will look at India like a coin that has a different image on each side. On April 20th, 2018, at dawn, 2 young men went fishing down the river toward a mangrove forest. They took a long boat ride downstream until they reached a remote and quiet place. One of them jumped into the water to tie up the boat, but his attention was distracted by a pungent, acrid odor that was very close by. They went ashore and followed the odor. Curiosity led them to a horrifying find. There was something that looked like a human body hanging on a tree branch and a skull lying nearby. The guys abandoned the boat and rushed to the nearest village to report the terrible find. A team of investigators, forensic experts, and police officers urgently arrived on the spot. The experts confirmed that the suspended body was indeed human. It was obvious that it had been hanging for a long time and had already begun to decompose. The flesh on the arms and legs had torn off and the skull was found nearby. Next to the body were packs of cigarettes, packaged drinking water, and a lighter which probably belonged to the victim. An investigation was conducted at the scene the same morning. The evidence found was seized, and the remains were sent for examination. The modest remnants of clothing that could be identified on the victim revealed that Liga Skromine, a 33-year-old hiker, was the victim of an accident. But who is Liga Skromine, and what happened to her on the riverbank? Liga Skromine was born in Latvia in 1986. She grew up in a large and friendly family, had an older brother and a younger sister. The sisters were very friendly and from childhood shared all joys and hardships with each other. Growing up, Liga moved to Ireland but always maintained close relations with her family. It was in Ireland that she met Andrew Jordan. It was not love at first sight, as the modest Liga had difficulty in communicating with new people. But after 5 years, Liga and Andrew turned into a married couple who made great plans for the future. Despite the fact that Liga worked in a hotel and led a modest lifestyle, she dreamed of opening her own center of yogic retreats in Portugal. Andrew supported his beloved's idea, and together they saved money for 4 years to fulfill their dream. But fate had other plans. In early 2018, Liga was experiencing the effects of an aggravated skin disease that was causing physical and mental discomfort. To help her sister overcome this ailment and restore her emotional state, her sister Ilza invited Liga on a trip. So in February 2018, Liga and Ilza traveled to Tiruvananthapuram, the capital of Kerala, so that Liga could receive Ayurvedic treatment for depression. Kovalam is the premier Ayurvedic resort of Kerala in India. Kovalam, which means grove of coconut palms in Hindi, is a small village offering everything you need for a comfortable and complete rest and treatment. Ayurveda is the oldest system of medical knowledge, which originated more than 5,000 years ago. Ayurveda is based on the universal laws of nature, on the unity of all things in this world. Ayurvedic programs help a person to restore balance and harmony in the body. Panchakarma is the best Ayurvedic program for modern man in Kerala. Panchakarma helps to reboot the body effectively. Most of those who have undergone the Panchakarma course in Kerala repeat it annually, and it is not without reason, as regular Panchakarma not only allows us to get rid of extra pounds, but also adds a couple of decades of healthy life. Since 1985, Ayurveda has been recognized by the World Health Organization as the most effective system of alternative medicine in the world. Let us emphasize that all the promised benefits of Ayurveda are only an alternative, not a panacea for healthy longevity. The 33-year-old Liga and her sister came to Kerala in search of spiritual enlightenment, hoping to be cured of depression in one of the Ayurveda centers. Their treatment tour was scheduled for 6 weeks and included yoga classes, meditation, therapeutic herbal drinks, and nutritional and massage recommendations. The sisters were treated together at an Ayurvedic clinic at Kovalam in Kerala, and have already completed their course. On the morning of March 14th, Liga refused to go to yoga class with her sister, explaining that she had a headache. When Isla returned to her room, Liga was not there. With the help of the hotel staff, Liga was able to find out that her sister left the hotel around 11:30 a.m., wearing leggings and a yoga t-shirt, hired an auto rickshaw, and went to Kovalam Beach for a walk. The beaches around Kovalam are popular destinations for both domestic and international travelers. The sandy beaches of Kovalam are always crowded. However, Liga could not be found there. Liga wandered the beach until late at night, showing her sister's picture, but never heard the long-awaited response that someone had seen her. This was actually strange, as Liga was a tall white girl who definitely stood out, and if she was actually on the beach, someone should have seen her. After searching unsuccessfully, Isla went to the police station to report her sister missing. However, the Indian police officers did not show any sympathy for the missing foreign tourist. On the contrary, they complacently asserted that they would surely find the girl who had strayed, or that she would surely return the next day. They were not even deterred by the fact that Liga, according to her sister, had psychological problems and could be an easy target for criminals. The police registered a case, but the investigation started coldly, or rather, it is more correct to say, did not start at all. Liga had traveled extensively in Kerala, visiting Kollam, Vakala, and finally came to Kovalam. She considered herself a very experienced traveler in India, and this time she took her sister with her to show her the India she loved so much. But the trip turned tragic. After a few days of inaction by the Indian police, Liga started searching on her own. She enlisted the help of friends and also reported Liga missing to her husband, Andrew, who flew urgently to India. The police investigation intensified after the missing person's husband, Andrew Jordan, and Liga contacted the local press and started an online campaign to find her. Liga also reached out via Twitter to India's Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj. Has been missing for 8 days. We are very worried, she wrote. The desperate sister announced a reward of 100,000 rupees to anyone who could help find Liga or provide any information about her movements that day. Liga and her friend Alexa, who had also traveled to India after hearing about Liga's disappearance, put up posters in the Kovalam beach area where Liga was last seen. Together, they put up flyers and distributed them to people. Numerous locals took an active part in the search for the missing tourist. The important fact remained that Liga suffered from depression and had a hard time interacting with strangers. On the day of her disappearance, she hired an auto rickshaw to reach the beach and was never seen again. She had about 8,000 rupees with her, but no passport, so she could not leave the country. Ashok Kumar, head of the local police station, said that the police had no leads in the case. The police kept saying that the tourist had gone on a bender or eloped and would soon return on her own. However, regular, persistent requests for help from Liga and Andrew forced the police to search for Liga. The search operation was conducted in the Kovalam beach area where Liga Skaney was last seen. Police assumed that she had drowned just as the unidentified body of a woman was found washed ashore at Kachal, in Kanyakumari district. Investigators examined the body along with the missing woman's sister, but the latter did not identify it as her sister. The version of drowning was not confirmed, and the search for Liga continued. Andrew, on the other hand, was convinced that his wife had been kidnapped by local gangs for the purpose of selling her. He tried to infiltrate these gangs to get more information, but was exposed and warned that repeated contact with the gangs would result in him having to leave the country. A month after Liga went missing, there were still no leads to help find the girl. Liga continued to look for her sister. She visited Kovalam beach every day and watched people. On one such day, she spotted a boat and she had a theory. The only way to leave the beach unnoticed was by boat. On April 17, 2018, after a forced hiatus, Andrew returned to India to continue his search. Liga and Andrew entered a new struggle to find Liga Skramana, but her body was still not found. The search was complicated by the fact that Liga was a tourist and a citizen of another country. The Latvian Foreign Ministry said the embassy was in constant contact with Liga's relatives and was also working closely with the Indian police. The Latvian embassy also appealed to the Indian Foreign Ministry with a request for special support in the search for Liga, as well as the Honorary Consul of Latvia in India, whose consular district includes the region where Liga disappeared. At the request of the Kerala state government, the Indian Navy and Air Force joined the search for the missing Latvian citizen. The search operation involved NN-32 transport plane, Gemini inflatable boats, underwater sonar, and 5 deep-sea divers. But even this extensive effort did not bring the desired result and Liga remained missing. The search continued, and by this time all local residents knew about the missing tourist from Latvia. They supported and sympathized with Andrew and Liga. On April 20, 2018, Liga's phone received the longest-awaited yet most horrific call of her life. A body had been found in the mangrove jungle. She and Andrew drove to the designated spot. The police were waiting for them. For the boat crossing, Liga's heart was pounding like never before. She felt that for the moment she would have to swim the path that Liga had traveled to her demise. On the spot, horror overwhelmed her. Liga saw her sister's clothes. She recognized the shirt and leggings on the body, but the jacket and shoes did not belong to Liga. It remained unclear how, with whom, and why. Liga had gotten to a place that could only be accessed by going through Panader from Samudra Beach. 2 women confirmed that they had witnessed Liga traveling alone into the mangrove forest. But why would a girl who was being treated for depression and already alone take a boat to a remote place in the forest? The The body was shifted to the Medical College Hospital where it underwent an autopsy which was captured on video camera. Police said they could not confirm the identity of the body until DNA analysis was completed. According to the city police commissioner, the body was badly mutilated with the head lying nearby. Police tentatively identified the dead woman as missing tourist Liga Scrumane. In favor of the investigators' conclusions is also the fact that Liga's relatives identified the victim by her hair and clothes. One of the versions put forward by rescue services in India was poisoning. There are poisonous pong-pong trees in the mangrove forest, and she could have accidentally or intentionally eaten their fruit and poisoned herself. Between 1989 and 1999, more than 500 people died from poisoning by its fruits in Kerala alone. However, this theory seemed nonsensical because the person was found hanging upside down, but there was no head. It is obvious that if Liga had been poisoned, her body would have been in a completely different position, and the head would have been in place. The Indian authorities were talking utter nonsense. Based on the information about Liga's complex psychological problems, the investigators also considered the possibility that Liga had voluntarily taken her own life. Liga feared that the police would try to pass off her sister's murder as a voluntary departure from life. Although a rope had been found at the scene, and it could be concluded that the hiker had hanged herself, Liga demanded a separate explanation for the missing head. "Don't tell me it's lost," Liga said sarcastically in yet another appeal on the internet. Breathlessly, Liga and the anxious public waited for the results of the forensic tests. The forensic results were overwhelming. The report stated that there were areas of blood pooling in part of Liga Scrumane's brain, as well as bruising in the neck area. The autopsy revealed that the woman had been strangled by several people and was killed in an attempted violent attack. There were external injuries on the body probably sustained during the struggle. However, the fact of violence could not be definitively confirmed as the body was in the decomposition stage. There were characteristic injuries on the cartilage in her throat, which indicated that someone had forcefully squeezed her throat. The trauma was severe enough to be fatal, according to forensic experts. There were blood clots in her brain, which confirmed strangulation. They also noted that there were bruises on her neck and legs. A total of 9 wounds were recorded on Liga Scrumane's body. In view of the above, the police no longer considered the version of voluntary death. According to the autopsy, it was determined that Liga was murdered after resisting or struggling. Ilse breathed a sigh of relief and hoped that the police would soon find her sister's killers. But there were complications as well. As part of the investigation, the police began checking out local drug dealers and card players. In addition, during interviews with local residents, 2 women said that they saw Liga walking alone to the place where her body was later found. But the police said they did not fully trust their words. Meanwhile, Liga's relatives have accused Indian police of incompetence, claiming that if the girl had been searched for immediately, the tragedy could have been avoided. The 33-year-old Latvian tourist is believed to have been grabbed from a nearby beach and transported by boat before being strangled. A special team of investigators has begun looking for those responsible for the crime. About 40 suspects were interviewed. However, arrests were planned to be made a few days later, after the law enforcers had enough evidence. The Indian police conducted an investigation that led to the arrest of 2 men, who were eventually accused of killing Liga Scrumane. Police revealed that Liga Scrumane was lured by 2 men, who then abused her before dismembering her body. The alleged assailants, who are now in custody, are local dealers in illegal substances. The suspects fully confessed under torture. Both the accused were pimps and were also dealing in illegal substances, police said. The autopsy did not reveal much evidence because Liga's body was badly decomposed. Andrew Jordan filed a petition in Superior Court for a review of the felony murder case. He believed that more people were involved in the woman's murder. In the petition, he pointed out that both defendants later recanted their pleas of guilty to the crime. According to Jordan, the men may have confessed because they were tortured, which as it turns out is a common practice in India. However, the Supreme Court of India denied the murdered woman's common-law husband, Andrew Jordan, a review of the case due to lack of direct evidence. The trial was postponed for 2 months, but Andrew was outraged by this attitude of the authorities. He had earlier accused the Kerala authorities and police of incompetence and attempts to cover up Liga's murder so as not to scare away tourists. Both the suspects' lawyers asked for and got a postponement by law. They have the right to postpone the case once without giving any reason. The more they postponed, the more he was convinced the case was unclean. However, both suspects were in custody. Investigation revealed that 32-year-old Umesh and 28-year-old Ajakumar offered Liga Skaney weed, and when she was drugged, they used it and then strangled and decapitated her. It is noted that the two men apprehended for the murder of Liga Skram had previously committed similar crimes on numerous occasions. Both of them worked for a food delivery company in the Kerala capital and earned money as illegal tour guides in their spare time. Umesh and Ujjan have been charged with destruction of evidence, murder, poisoning, kidnapping, and rape. The place where Liga's corpse was found had earlier served as a pleasure ground for Umesh. He used to take men there. 13 criminal cases have been filed against him, including 6 for sexual assault and 1 for attempted murder. Several of Umesh's victims have testified against him. Liga Skram, along with both men, was seen in the area by several people. They were initially silent, but confessed to everything after the body was found. The detainees confessed to police that they committed the murder while attempting violence. They were apprehended, but had previously claimed that they had only seen Liga Skram in Kovalam. The men pleaded guilty after repeated interrogations. On December 6, 2022, the court finally sentenced both men to life in prison. The court also recognized that the criminals must pay compensation to Liga Skram's sister, Ilsa, 65,000 rupees each. We would like to note that there has been a whole series of such crimes in this country recently. Young girls are regularly subjected to violence. The problem of crime in India is very acute. Due to the huge number of sexual acts against minors, the government has introduced the death penalty. It is also worth noting that if the relatives, and primarily Liga's sister, had not been persistent, had they not involved the press. By organizing a press conference and an influential MP, it is obvious that the local police would hardly have seriously investigated the case. At first, a theory was put forward that Liga had allegedly passed away voluntarily, and as it now turns out, this is not the first incident in this very place where Liga was found. After this story, I would like to warn once again all women who are frivolous about the dangers of traveling alone in India. Do not seek spiritual enlightenment in distant, dangerous, and uncharted countries. Take care of yourself. In 2014, during a routine traffic stop in Smith County, Mississippi, an incredibly disturbing case came to light. The police were drawn to a truck due to a strong odor emanating from it. As the officer asked the driver for his paperwork, he observed that the man appeared anxious and confused. The vehicle reeked of decay, and upon further investigation, the driver was identified as 37-year-old Timothy Jones Jr. The situation became even more concerning when the officers learned that Jones had 5 children. Yet the truck was empty, containing only some clothing items. When asked about his children, Jones initially denied having any, then changed his story, claiming he had 3 children who were supposedly in South Carolina. This inconsistency raised suspicions, prompting the officer to detain Jones for further questioning. What they discovered rendered them speechless. Timothy Jones Jr. and Amber Kaiser, a divorced couple with 5 children all under the age of 9, Mara Grace, Elias Xavier, Nathan Hayside, Gabriel Asher, and Elaine Marie. They lived in Lexington, South Carolina. When Amber met Timothy, she was drawn to his world and felt connected to him and his lifestyle. They were teenagers when they met and married very young. Timothy attended school in Mississippi while Amber focused on homemaking. From a young age, Timothy witnessed his mother's mental health deteriorate due to schizophrenia. She eventually required constant care and left home to work in intimate services, with his family telling Timothy she had simply gone far away and abandoned him. His father, Timothy Jones Sr., who was 20 at the time, moved with Timothy to his grandmother's house, where he was exposed to domestic violence, substance abuse, and alcohol. Despite his tough upbringing, Timothy showed a talent for numbers, solving math problems with ease, and could disassemble and reassemble computers to make them faster. He seemed to have a natural understanding of how machines worked. However, things changed when Timothy reached adolescence and began hearing voices at the age of 10. By middle school, he had started using drugs and drinking excessively. At 15, he suffered a traumatic brain injury in a car accident, which affected his frontal lobe, the brain area controlling impulses and linked to psychopathy in various studies. After the accident, Timothy's behavior became erratic and stubborn. He was also very jealous of his father, feeling that anyone who had a relationship with him took away his father's attention. Over time, Timothy believed his father didn't love him and feared he would end up abandoned. Despite his growing intelligence, his emotional development was stunted, leaving him with the mentality of a child and lacking common sense and empathy. After finishing high school, Timothy Jones Jr. dreamed of joining the elite U.S. Navy SEALs. His intelligence earned him a chance to study there, but he faced a major hurdle. He lacked athletic talent and discipline, lasting only a few weeks in training. Often found crying out of frustration, he struggled to keep up with the rigorous demands. This led to depression, and a subsequent drug test revealed substance abuse, resulting in his expulsion. In 2000, Timothy began associating with individuals involved in bad things. One day, the police found him in possession of illegal substances and discovered he had been writing checks in his father's name. The police warned Jones's father that he had to press charges against his son or face arrest himself. In 2001, Timothy Jones Jr. was sent to a labor camp in an Illinois state prison for a year. Upon release, he seemed transformed, having found religion as a guiding force in his life. He memorized significant portions of religious texts and aspired to live strictly by them. Jones met Amber, the mother of his children, while they both worked at an amusement park in Chicago. After some time, in 2004, he invited her to his Pentecostal church. Within weeks, they decided to marry, adhering to the church's expectation for immediate marriage. Amber was 19 and Timothy was 22. Soon, Amber realized the church's strictness. Women couldn't cut their hair, wear pants, makeup, or jewelry, and Timothy believed that women should be submissive to their husbands, be fruitful and multiply. Timothy was deeply religious, dedicating himself entirely to the church. Many advised him against taking the Bible literally, but he remained steadfast. The young couple quickly had 3 children, Mara, Elias, and Nathan, each born a year apart. With their growing family, they moved to Mississippi, where Timothy eventually graduated with highest honors from the state university, earning a degree in computer science and engineering. Timothy Jones Jr. managed all of this while being married, having children, and working various jobs. His family couldn't have been prouder. Tim was truly a remarkable genius with a promising future. Everything seemed to be going well for him. He landed a job as a computer chip manufacturer at Intel, which Amber saw as their ticket to a better life. After living in student housing in Mississippi, they dreamed of raising their 3 children in a bigger house and even considered hiring a nanny. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. Tim chose to buy a rundown trailer on a dirt road in Red Bank because he dreamed of living on a farm. He bought animals to raise, and Amber stayed home with the kids and the animals in this isolated area. She didn't have a car or know how to drive. By 2012, the couple had 2 more children, and problems began to arise. Tim doubted the paternity of their youngest daughter, Elaine, and wanted Amber to homeschool the children. Though she only had a high school education, Amber felt increasingly isolated with no family nearby and Tim's family in Mississippi. She felt inferior to her intelligent and educated husband. Tensions escalated when Tim accused Amber of having an affair with a neighbor. The marriage crumbled and they considered divorce. Tim didn't want Amber in the children's lives, so he visited a therapist and asked for a sworn statement for his divorce lawyer, claiming he was fit to raise the children alone. Amber, without a lawyer and unsure what to do, eventually decided it was best for the children to stay with their father, as she had nothing to offer, no job or education. Tim gained primary custody as the sole financial provider, and Amber was granted regular visitation rights. She left her husband and children. Mentally, Tim was losing control, anguished by his failed marriage. He began using drugs and drinking again, struggling with the voices in his head. He became easily angered over minor things, and Amber reported that he once beat her in front of their children until she lost consciousness. Unable to manage work and home, he hired a nanny service. Despite his condition, the first two nannies noted that his home was immaculate and he was dedicated and attentive to his children. Later, he switched services and hired 17-year-old Crystal, who had a young daughter. The nanny soon became his lover, and Tim tried to indoctrinate her into his religion, insisting she adopt the church's customs, wearing long dresses, growing her hair out, and being subordinate to him. When she refused, their relationship deteriorated. Crystal later testified that Tim was extremely harsh with his children, making them stand on their toes for hours as he believed punishment was necessary for their sick bodies. She left after catching him trying to hit her young daughter. After Crystal left, Tim hired another nanny. She noticed a drastic change in Tim. His once clean home was now filled with trash and dirty clothes, and there were even cockroaches. Over time, Timothy Jones Jr. became increasingly violent, punishing his children daily. He developed the habit of feeding them only oatmeal throughout the day, limiting them to one meal. In August 2014, the nanny contacted South Carolina's social services to report the conditions in Tim's home. She described the lack of food and the physical abuse the children suffer. The abuse was so severe that the teachers at the elementary school, attended by the older children, had already reported it to the agency months earlier. The agency had previously required Jones to sign a written promise never to mistreat or hit his children again, as they often arrived at school with bruises. When asked about the injuries, the children said their father would grab them by the neck and slam them against the wall. On the afternoon of Thursday, August 28, 2014, Tim picked up his 3 older children from elementary school, then his 2 younger ones from the nanny. Around 7 p.m., Timothy got angry about some broken outlets in their mobile home. He questioned his 6-year-old son, Nathan, about the damage. When Nathan said he didn't know, Timothy forced Nathan to do push-ups, squats, and other exercises before having him repeat the circuit over and over again. Whenever Nathan would slow down, Timothy would whip him with a belt. While Nathan was being punished, Amber, Tim's ex-wife, called to speak with her children. The calls were logged at 7 o'clock, 7.02, 7.05, and 7.09, until Timothy finally answered at 7.10. During the call, Nathan told his mother about the punishment for the broken outlets, saying it was an accident. Enraged, Timothy ended the call, telling Amber to stop protecting the boy. After hours of torture, Nathan was exhausted, dehydrated, and begging for it to end. He collapsed, putting an end to it all. Timothy carried him to bed and left him alone without water or aid. Phone records show that Amber tried to call back 8 more times. At 8.30, Timothy searched for an explicit scene from the movie American History on YouTube, despite knowing his son was already unresponsive. Around 1 a.m., Jones took his 8-year-old daughter, Mara, to a local convenience store to buy 10 packs of cigarettes. Upon returning home, he grabbed Mara and began to strangle her. Next, Timothy went to his 7-year-old son, Elias, and did the same thing. After that, he removed his belt and went to Gabriel, who was 2, and Elaine, who was 1. He placed the belt around their necks and pulled until they stopped breathing. Seeing that none of the children were moving, he took their sheets and blankets, wrapped them separately, and placed them in the back seat of his car. On Friday, August 29th, Jones's father called him at around 7:43 a.m., but there was no answer. At 9.36, the nanny called, and on her second attempt, Jones answered. She asked if he would be dropping the younger kids at daycare, and he told her not to worry, saying he would take them next week, mentioning that they were out and would return by Tuesday. That morning, he drove from place to place. Between noon and 2 p.m., he searched online for drugs out of state. At 12:17, Jones was near Alabama, and his grandmother called him multiple times. But he did not answer and continued to ignore her messages throughout the day, totaling 23 attempts. Between 3 and 5 p.m., Jones searched online for tobacco shops in Alabama and Mississippi and for camping sites in South Carolina. At 8:04 p.m., his location was recorded in Georgia. The next day, August 30th, his grandmother continued sending messages, asking why he wasn't responding to her calls. His phone's location was recorded in Red Bank, New Jersey. On August 31st at 10:08 a.m., Jones searched the internet for camping stores and RV parks in South Carolina landfills, Lexington County landfills, and animal services, in addition to 2 songs. At 4:54 p.m., the nanny texted Timothy Jones Jr. to remind him to bring diapers when he dropped off Gabriel and Elaine on Tuesday. An hour later, he replied, saying he had left South Carolina with the children to start fresh and asked her to clean the mobile home, offering her to take whatever she wanted from the belongings he left behind. His ex-wife called him at 7 p.m., but he did not answer. On September 1st, he was driving from place to place. The next morning at 10:35, he searched the internet for body in landfill, how to make muriatic acid, camping near Colombia, countries with no extradition laws and facing legal problems, where should I run? Throughout the day, he received text messages from the nanny informing him she had cleaned the mobile home. His boss at Intel also messaged him, asking if he was coming to work. At around 6 p.m., Amber called, but he did not answer. On the morning of September 3rd, a coworker called twice without getting a response. Later, Timothy was captured on surveillance video at a well-known store, buying a saw, muriatic acid, garbage bags, a 5-gallon bucket, and goggles. At 3:37 a.m., he searched online for Tim Jones's missing children. His location was recorded in Charleston, South Carolina. At 6:33 a.m. on September 4th, he was seen at a bank, depositing a check for $3,518. The next day, September 5th, his location was tracked to Louisville, Georgia. His phone was only turned on once that day. On the morning of September 6th, Jones placed the decomposing bodies of his children in black plastic garbage bags and left them in a clearing along a forest road in a rural area in Alabama. This was recorded at 9:14 a.m. The bodies had been in the back seat of Timothy Jones Jr.'s vehicle since August 29th. By 7 p.m. on September 6th, he was stopped at a traffic checkpoint in Smith County, Mississippi. A police officer approached the vehicle and noticed a putrid odor emanating from inside. Additionally, the carpet appeared to be stained with bleach as if it had been recently cleaned. The sheriff requested Jones's identification and the car's registration. He observed that Jones seemed to be under the influence of drugs. Upon checking his information, the police officer found out he was wanted in South Carolina over a child welfare issue. When asked about his children's whereabouts, Jones first claimed he had no children, then said he had 3 children who were in South Carolina. The officers asked for the phone numbers of his father, grandmother, and ex-wife to verify the children's safety. After making the calls, they immediately arrested Jones. The police mentioned that as soon as Jones was placed in the patrol car, he became emotional and started telling the officers what he had done to the children. He explained that he felt a deep sorrow and angered because one of his sons was playing with an electrical outlet. He grabbed the boy by the neck and choked him until he passed out. After that, he did the same to his other son, using a belt because his hands were too large. When his eldest daughter walked in and saw what was happening, he grabbed her and choked her with his hands until she turned purple. In another account, Jones said that when he saw his son playing with the electrical outlet, he believed the boy was trying to harm him, which led him to kill his son. In an audio recording, investigators are heard discussing how Timothy Jones Jr., his 6-year-old son, Nathan, to do hours of physical exercises after the boy accidentally turned off the electrical outlets in the family's living room. Jones told investigators that he eventually sent Nathan to bed, only to find him dead later when he checked on him. When asked why he did it, Jones mentioned that he killed his children because he heard voices in his head and believed his children were conspiring against him. He also thought his children would be happier in heaven. During his days on the run, Jones traveled through the southeast with the bodies of his 5 children under blankets in his car. He ultimately dumped their bodies in a remote forest in Alabama before being arrested by chance during a routine traffic stop in Mississippi. By September 9th, after giving his second statement, Tim claimed he didn't mean to do it. He said the punishment imposed on Naten got out of hand, and when he went to the boy's room, he found him lifeless due to the strenuous exercises. Not knowing what to do, he decided to end the lives of all his children. The pathologist mentioned that after the autopsy, she couldn't definitively establish the cause of death. However, she suggested that Naten might have been so weakened from the excessive exercise that it didn't take much force for his father to finish him off. Investigators questioned why Jones didn't call 911 if it was truly an accident. Instead, he tried to hide and dispose of his children. That same day, Tim agreed to lead investigators to the location where he had dumped the bodies. On September 10th, the remains of his 5 children were recovered. On September 11th, the evidence collected from Jones's car was turned over to South Carolina authorities. Among the items cataloged were family photos, children's clothing, drawings by the children, letters to the children written by their mother, Timothy Jones's diploma from Mississippi State University, and Jones's passport. There were also handwritten notes by Timothy Jones, Jr., which included to-do lists such as removing bodies, grinding bones into powder or small pieces, burning bodies and items like camping supplies, gas, and muriatic acid. On September 13, 2014, Jones was admitted to a correctional institution and placed in a special cell away from the general population. Since his incarceration, Jones has been evaluated by mental health professionals, including psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and forensic experts. Opinions among these professionals varied. Some diagnosed him with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, or personality disorder, suggesting that his mental state at the time of the crime might have been worsened by drug use, and the traumatic brain injury he suffered at 15, which could have contributed to an underlying psychosis. These theories were presented to the jury during the trial. However, other specialists argued that Tim was mentally competent and that his actions to conceal evidence, including his children, indicated that he knew he had done something morally and legally wrong. His internet search history further suggested he knew exactly what he was doing and what needed to be done. The prosecution argued that Tim cracked under the stress of a broken marriage and the demands of caring for 5 young children. According to his statements, the trigger for his actions was his wife's alleged infidelity with their neighbor at the time, who is now her husband. She testified that she never committed adultery and that her relationship with the neighbor began after her divorce. The trial took place in late May 2019, involving weeks of intense testimonies and evidence presented against Timothy. The crime is considered one of the worst murders in South Carolina's history. Mara's last words to her father were, "Daddy, I love you." When police searched the house after the crime, they found Naten's favorite toy from Toy Story broken into pieces. Naten seemed to be the most severely punished. Yet all testimonies agreed on one thing: the children loved their father. On June 13, 2019, after 2 hours of deliberation, Timothy Jones Jr. was sentenced to death. He is currently in solitary confinement at a correctional institution, wearing a green jumpsuit that identifies him as a death row inmate. This tragic case ended the lives of innocent children due to marital problems, with both the father and mother making irreversible mistakes. Case of Lorena Bobbitt. It's said that a humiliated and insulted woman is capable of anything, with the most terrifying in this list being revenge, cruel, ingenious, and sometimes unpredictable. Much in this regard depends on the lady's level of sanity, but one must not overlook the depth of her hurt. This destructive emotion can be carefully hidden within a woman for years, but if it erupts, it will sweep away everything in its path. The story of the Bobbitt spouses in the early 90s shook the world, and their surname became a byword, spawning the verb to bobbit, which means to cut or to chop. This case drew heightened public attention not just to the issues of domestic violence, but also to such a delicate subject as marital assault, which many tried to sidestep. Lorena Leonor Bobbitt was born on May 15, 1970, in the town of Bucawi, located in eastern Ecuador near the province of Chimborazo. She was the youngest child in a simple and very modest family. When she was in elementary school, her family moved to Venezuela and settled in Caracas. Lorena grew up quite clever. She performed well in school, was diligent and goal-oriented. In her teenage years, she lost her father and her relationship with her mother. Elvia Gallo was quite strained. As soon as she graduated from school, she decided to move to the United States to live with her cousin, Jana Basutti. Her relative gladly took her in and helped her with the paperwork for a student visa. However, she was a very conservative woman, so Lorena, living in her house, had to abide by a strict set of rules, just like Jana's own children, and also take on some of the household duties. Despite everything, the young woman decided to stay in the US as she realized that it offered her far more opportunities than Latin America. She had long been attracted to the beauty industry, so Gallo decided to train as a manicurist. Moreover, Basutti owned her own beauty salon located in the city center, had extensive experience in the field, and was eager to help her niece learn the profession by allowing her to observe the work of the specialists and practice on her own. Later, her aunt arranged for her to work part-time in her salon. About 8 months after she moved to the new country, the young woman had settled in, enrolled in college, and was working as a manicurist in her relative's salon while gradually saving money. In September 1988, Lorena was preparing to go to a party with several of her friends. Her aunt gave her strict instructions on how to behave and what time she needed to be home, and she promised that everything would be fine. The modest young beauty was nervous as it was her first time preparing to go to a nightlife establishment late at night. She chose a relatively modest outfit, unlike her friends, applied makeup and styled her hair fashionably. Upon arriving at the nightclub, she was struck by the carefree and festive atmosphere. Inside, the venue was filled with young people dancing, having fun and socializing, and Lorena couldn't help but think that such a place might be where she could meet the man of her dreams. This thought proved to be prophetic. A few minutes later, she noticed a very attractive young man intently looking at her and smiling. He waved at her and she waved back. Then the young man approached her and introduced himself. He was John Bobbitt, and he could not take his eyes off the young beauty with the quite exotic appearance. The guy was handsome, tall, and charismatic. He cracked jokes and skillfully paid compliments so she couldn't resist his charm. They spent the evening dancing and chatting, and afterwards the new acquaintance walked Lorena to her aunt's home. As they said goodbye, he asked for her home phone number and promised to call soon. John Wayne Bobbitt was born on March 24, 1967, in Buffalo in the northwestern part of New York State. He was the youngest of 3 children in his family. At the age of 3, the boy lost his father, who tragically died, and his mother, unable to cope with the shock, ended up in a psychiatric clinic after a serious nervous breakdown. All 3 children were taken into the care of their religious aunt and uncle, who wanted to help their relatives in this difficult situation. The boy was still very young at the time, but the events that occurred undoubtedly left a mark on his life. The aunt and uncle raised the children with strictness in accordance with religious canons. They all attended church every Sunday and engaged in charity work, trying to help those around them. John was not an outstanding student, but overall he did fairly well in school. As a teenager, he decided to pursue a future in military service. After undergoing the necessary training and special preparation at a military academy, the young man joined the ranks of the Marines, where he proved himself as a brave, disciplined, and determined young man. However, after a few years, the strict regime and the need to obey in the army began to weigh on him. After leaving the service with some military experience and skills, he was hired as a security guard at one of the city's popular establishments, but he later changed jobs frequently, not staying long at any. The day after they met, John, as promised, called Lorena to ask her out on a date. The young couple simply walked through the park, engaging in easy conversation about various topics, and John made it clear that he wanted to continue their relationship. Lorena was not opposed to this, but according to the rules set by her aunt, she had to introduce her boyfriend to her before they could start a serious relationship. John accepted all the conditions, and on the appointed day, he came to dinner at the home of his beloved's relative. Bobbitt was very sweet, courteous, and considerate, yet he made an effort to appear serious. He managed to make a good impression on the strict Jana, and after a serious one-on-one conversation with the young man, the woman allowed her niece to continue seeing John. 6 months after the start of their romantic relationship, the suitor proposed to Lorena and she accepted. she was overjoyed, having always dreamed of a family, children, and a home of her own. The couple began preparing for the most important event of their lives, and in June 1989, shortly after Gallo turned 19, they made their union official. The wedding celebration was quite modest, as the young couple did not have the money for a lavish ceremony, and they chose to spend their savings on a honeymoon by the warm ocean coast. They were happy, but the only shadow over the celebration was the absence of the bride and groom's parents. Instead, their aunts and uncles came to share the joyous moment with them. After the wedding and a delightful honeymoon, the couple moved to Virginia and settled in a quiet and cozy area of the city called Manassas. The first few months of their life together were like a real fairy tale. They enjoyed each other's company, showing mutual tenderness, care, and love. But as the new year of 1990 approached, the situation began to change for the worse. At first, Lorena tried not to pay much attention to some of her young husband's remarks and rudeness, thinking it was just a so-called adjustment period. But one day, when she served cooled soup for dinner, her husband simply threw the plate on the floor and then started yelling at his wife, insulting her and calling her a terrible homemaker. She tried to argue, pointing out that John whined. He closely monitored where she went and who she spoke to. At home, she had to follow the rules he set, and intimacy between them occurred only when John wanted it, regardless of Lena's wishes. The poor girl couldn't share her problems with anyone as she found the situation shameful and humiliating. On June 22, 1993, John, along with his longtime military buddy, decided to go out to an entertainment venue. The men partied and drank until late at night, while Lorena was at home alone. She did not wait up for her husband and went to the bedroom around midnight, soon falling asleep. Around 3 in the morning, a drunk and aroused John returned home. He didn't waste any time and ripped the shirt off his sleeping wife. Lorena hardly understood what was happening when her husband forcefully took advantage of her. She begged him to stop and not to do this, crying, but he was completely indifferent to her pleas and tears. After it was over, John simply collapsed next to her and fell asleep. Lorena, trembling and sobbing, made her way to the kitchen. She poured herself some water and took a few sips to calm down, but then her gaze fell on a stand with large, sharp kitchen knives. Her hand reached out on its own and pulled out a carving knife. Out of her mind, she went back to the bedroom where her husband lay on his back, snoring drunkenly. She grabbed his genitalia with her left hand, squeezed hard, and sharply cut through with the knife, severing a large part of it. John jumped up, screaming in agony, while Lorena simply walked out of the room, went to the garage, and got into her car, speeding away through the deserted nighttime streets of the city. She only came to her senses at an intersection when she saw a red light at the traffic signal. At that moment, she looked at her blood-stained hands and realized that she was still holding the severed part of John's body in her left hand. She rolled down the window and threw the detested piece of flesh out, then continued driving. Lorena headed to the home of a close friend who was stunned by her nighttime visit and the state she was in. After Lorena told her what had happened, her friend, realizing the gravity of the situation, called the police herself and summoned a medical team to the house where the injured Bobbitt was. Precision surgery was required. Throughout this ordeal, John was desperately trying to stop the bleeding by pressing a sheet against his wound. Notably, the groin vein is a major vessel, and its injury nearly always results in death from blood loss. However, John was somewhat fortunate, if one could say that, because a clot had formed, significantly slowing the blood loss. The responding medics arrived in time to transport him to the nearest hospital, where he received immediate medical attention. Question then arose about the whereabouts of the severed part of his genitalia, as it was still possible to reattach it to its original place, with restoration of its initial physiological functions. Lorena indicated the approximate area of the road where she had discarded her husband's anatomical fragment, and after an extensive search, the police were able to find it. The amputated organ was cleansed with antiseptic, then placed in a special container with medical ice and urgently transported to the hospital where the injured party was already being treated. The surgeon who arrived from the state capital was astounded by the complexity of the situation, as he had never encountered such a case before. But he proceeded with the operation anyway. He performed a unique surgery for that time, which lasted more than 9 hours and was more than successful. Despite the traumatic amputation of the organ and the fact that it had lain on the road for over an hour, all tissues and vessels were successfully reattached, and the patient quickly began to recover. Public outcry ensued. That same night, Lorena was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning, as well as to clarify all the circumstances and motives of her actions. She immediately confessed to everything and shared her harrowing story that had driven her to such a desperate act. She recounted how 4 years of marriage had turned into a real nightmare for her, with her husband regularly abusing her, both emotionally and physically, and forcing intimacy only when he desired. Mrs. Bobbitt also mentioned how, about a year ago, her husband had forced her to terminate a pregnancy, despite her deep desire to have a child, and that abortion had been a traumatizing event for her. Regarding the incident itself, she said she remembered very little of that night, and had acted as if she were in a fog. Lorena recounted how her husband had come home drunk, and simply taken advantage of her, and although she tried to resist, he ignored her. After the incident, she went to the kitchen for water, and the next thing she remembered was her husband's scream, the roar of the car engine, and the part of his genitalia that she was clutching in her hand as she sat behind the wheel. The case caused a significant stir in the press and was actively covered by the media. Many women like Lorena, who had suffered from domestic violence, as well as feminist organizations which were gaining strength and popularity at the time, rallied to her side. In the early 90s, wives who were subjected to emotional and physical abuse by their husbands typically remained silent about their plight. Society was still inclined to blame the victims themselves, suggesting that they provoked conflicts or behaved improperly. It was assumed that a wife should be submissive and obey her husband in everything. And if the husband was dissatisfied and resorted to violence, it was considered the wife's fault. It was her fault. Intimacy in marriage was considered a duty of the wife, not open to discussion. On the other hand, almost all men sided with John. Many feared that Lorena's act might prove contagious, prompting other women suffering from physical and intimate violence in marriage to also take up knives. According to official statistics, there were several million such women in the country at that time. Trials and sentences of the spouses, 2 parallel court cases, began almost simultaneously. Lorena officially charged her husband only with taking advantage of her on that fateful night. Although in court she detailed the years of regular abuse and beatings, emotional violence and humiliations she endured, as well as the abortion she was forced to undergo against her will under her husband's coercion. John's testimony was confused. He denied all allegations against him, but much of what Lorena said was corroborated by facts. For instance, it was confirmed that he did not have steady employment or a stable source of income. Yet he loved spending time in entertainment venues, often forcibly or deceitfully taking money from his wife to do so. Additionally, Lorena's friends confirmed that they had repeatedly seen bruises and scrapes on her body, and she had been in a depressed state for a long time, though she tried not to complain. The court concluded that the husband had indeed abused his wife both emotionally and physically throughout their marriage, driving her to desperation. However, regarding the charge of intimate violence that occurred on the night of June 23, 1993, there was not enough evidence, and thus John was acquitted. He presented several versions of what happened that evening, and the jury, composed of 9 women and 3 men, found him not guilty. In the fall of that year, Lorena's trial began in September 1993. She was charged with inflicting severe bodily harm on her spouse. Her lawyers argued that she acted while suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, caused by the ongoing emotional and physical abuse from her husband. A psychiatric evaluation was ordered, which confirmed that she acted in a state of distress, unaware of her actions, and therefore could not be held responsible for what she had done. In early January of the following year, after nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that Lorena could not be held criminally responsible for her actions, as she was in a state of insanity at the time of the offense. However, she was required to undergo a 6-week treatment program at a specialized clinic, after which she was able to return to her previous life. The spouses officially divorced only in 1995, after which Lorena reverted to her maiden name. What became of John later? John remained indignant for a long time that his wife faced no punishment for her actions. He decided to fully capitalize on his sudden notoriety, aiming to extract as much money as possible from such scandalous fame. John founded his own music band called Severed Parts, but the group was short-lived as it failed to garner any public interest. When offered a substantial fee to star in adult films in the late 90s, he did not hesitate to accept. Thus he appeared in explicit films titled Frankenpenis, a play on Frankenstein, and John Wayne Bobbitt Uncut. John acted in several more films of a similar genre, but interest in him and his reattached organ quickly waned. For a long time, John was eager to appear on various talk shows and gave interviews extensively. But over the years, such offers became less frequent, and the story gradually faded from memory. John then found work as a bartender in an entertainment venue in Las Vegas, and by his 50s he was struggling to make ends meet by taking jobs as a mover, driver, and pizza delivery man. In 1999, he received a suspended sentence for theft. Regarding his personal life during the high-profile court case that the entire country followed, journalists discovered that Bobbitt had an illegitimate son named Andrew, born in 1992 to one of his lovers, Beatrice Williams. In 1994, John was brought to trial for assaulting his new girlfriend, Christina Elliott, who worked as a dancer in a nightclub. He spent 15 days in jail for this and received probation. In the early 2000s, John was arrested 3 times for assaulting his then-wife, Joanna Farrell. This time, he was imprisoned for a year for violating his probation. They officially divorced in 2004. What happened to Lorena? Unlike her former husband, Lorena did not take pride in her scandalous notoriety and tried to stay out of the limelight. In 1996, she decided to return to her native Ecuador, where her mother, Elia, was living at the time. However, just 6 months later, Lorena made the news again when her mother accused her of assault. The conflict was resolved without going to court, and the women continued to live together. A year later, Lorena returned to the USA, where she opened her own small beauty salon in Washington. In 2007, she founded a foundation called Lena's Red Wagon, which focused on helping women who had suffered from domestic violence. Soon after, Lorena agreed to give an interview for the first time in a long time and appeared on CBS News Morning Show, where she discussed her life post-incident. She also appeared on the popular Oprah Winfrey talk show in the mid-2000s. Lorena remarried, and her new husband was a man named Dave Bellinger, with whom she had a daughter in 2006. She preferred not to recall her marriage to Bob at all and claimed she did not follow his life after their divorce. In 2009, nearly 15 years after their sensational legal battles had ended, the former spouses met face-to-face for the first time on the show Insider. John apologized to Lorena for the way he had treated her during their marriage and declared that he still loved her despite everything. Lorena was visibly moved by his words and confirmed that every year on Valentine's Day, her ex-husband still sends her flowers and cards. Melissa was born in Tampa, Florida, and from an early age, she found solace in horror and fantasy films due to her shyness. As a teenager, her love for manga and anime ignited a desire to cosplay, but her weight made her self-conscious. Instead of pursuing her passion, she hid her body under layers of clothing and focused on her studies. After graduating with excellent grades, Melissa faced a $26,000 debt. Feeling depressed, she turned to online health and fitness forums, determined to lose weight. Between 2011 and 2013, she successfully lost 90 pounds, gaining confidence and embracing a more daring style. Proud of her transformation, Melissa started sharing pictures on Tumblr, attracting a large following. She also found love and began dating Cameron. In addition to her personal blog, she created a second one with explicit content, featuring herself as various characters. Her growing online presence led her to the cosplay community she had always dreamed of joining. At a party, a friend mentioned making good money through webcam shows. Initially hesitant, Melissa eventually decided to try it to pay off her debts. By 2014, she was juggling 3 jobs, including webcam shows at night. Realizing the earning potential, she quit her other jobs and focused on webcam modeling, where she could freely express herself and earn a living. After 2 years, the demand started to decline as new girls captured all the public's attention. Melissa decided to seek something new but related to her current work, leading her to the adult film industry. She began filming movies that combined her 2 passions, cosplay and horror. She created a website and her followers quickly grew, as did her social media presence. With this advantage, she opened a Patreon account where her fans could donate to her, receiving thousands of dollars, although she still wanted to earn more. In 2016, she gathered other girls who worked in the same field and complained about not having a fixed place to make their videos. Melissa, along with her boyfriend, opened an erotic photography studio, which was a complete success. However, problems soon arose as she managed everything alone with little help from her partner. After many arguments, they decided to end their relationship. In 2017, the business went bankrupt and Melissa's self-esteem noticeably declined. She decided to undergo cosmetic surgeries which made her feel invincible. And it was then that she downloaded Tinder, confident she would find new love. Matthew Trussler was born on January 11, 1994 in Massachusetts. From a young age, he was a fun and charismatic boy who loved spending time with his family and friends, who were the center of his life. After graduating from university, he began working as a general manager at an Italian restaurant. Despite his good economic standing in 2015, he decided it was time for a change. He was offered a job in Tampa. Motivated to see more sun and his brother who lived there, he accepted the offer. The first few months passed smoothly, and Matthew eventually found a job at another company, this time in technology, which aligned more with his interests. Over the following years, he prospered professionally and continued to build friendships, always managing to bring a smile to everyone he met. However, something was missing in his life: love. Thus, in April 2017, he decided to download Tinder and met none other than Melissa Turner. The connection was almost instant. They began talking daily and soon started a relationship. As both had good economic standings, in December 2018, they bought a house. It was excessively large for 2 young people with 2 floors, for bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and 2 patios with a pool. On January 11th, Matthew expressed his happiness on Facebook, posting, "A quarter of a century later, I have a mortgage, for furry babies, and a wonderful girl. I am a happy man." Shortly after, they got engaged and seemed truly confident in their love. They spent time with their pets and posted pictures where they looked very much in love. But behind closed doors, the situation was very different. Matthew was increasingly distant from his family. They hardly saw him and he didn't answer their calls. His close ones began to suspect that Melissa wanted to distance him from the rest of the world to have him all to herself. As months went by, things worsened. The few times they managed to talk to Matthew, he avoided questions about his relationship, becoming excessively nervous. By then, his brother was convinced that his sister-in-law was a manipulative and jealous person, suspecting that the couple argued constantly, usually because Matthew did not follow Melissa's orders, as she wanted to control his every move. They weren't the only ones who noticed this strange dynamic. Their neighbors were concerned about the noises coming from the house, believing that Melissa had a temper problem, which was evident during a party they hosted. The couple invited all their friends and played loud music. Initially, there was no issue. It was normal for 2 young people to want to have fun. However, in the middle of the night, loud screams woke up the entire neighborhood. Looking out their windows, they saw Melissa grabbing another girl by the hair and dragging her into the house, but both were in costume. And none of the guests seemed disturbed. They thought it might be some kind of show, but they couldn't have been more wrong. After a while, they continued hearing Melissa, noticeably agitated, and the other girls screaming and pleading. From then on, the neighbors kept a close watch on the young homeowner's behavior, hearing her daily insults toward Matthew, banging on furniture, or raising her voice. Finally, on September 20th, 2019, Matthew decided to end the abuse. He told Melissa he no longer wanted to be with her and even made a series of posts on his Facebook account indicating he was single. While his family couldn't get much information from him about this, they noticed he seemed relieved and hoped he would turn to them for comfort. But this never happened. Matthew ended up getting back together with Melissa one last time. The neighbors were sure they would separate again, and they were right, but not in the way they anticipated. On October 17, 2019, the couple went shopping and had lunch at home as if everything was fine. But less than 24 hours later, something terrible happened. Melissa made a frantic and agitated 911 call, saying that the previous night she and her fiancé had consumed a large amount of alcohol and went to bed completely drunk. That morning, when she woke up, she noticed he wasn't there and searched the house, eventually finding him lying on the floor of the backyard in a pool of blood. The police rushed to the house in the Tampa suburbs. Upon arrival, they saw Matthew's body face up near the pool. The first thing Melissa did was tell them she had tried to perform CPR but was unsuccessful. The officers believed her, but something didn't add up. Matthew had cuts on his arm and chest, and Melissa had dried blood all over her body and a cut on her hand. Something wasn't adding up. After confirming the young man's death, the police escorted Melissa to the sheriff's office for additional questioning to understand what really happened. She repeated the same story to the officers that she had told over the phone, recounting that both she and her fiancé had drunk until they fell asleep, and that she found his body in the garden the next day. Meanwhile, the detectives canvassed the neighborhood for clues and noticed something intriguing. A nearby house had a surveillance camera pointed directly at the young couple's home. They quickly checked the footage from this camera, suspecting it could provide valuable evidence, and they were right. They also discovered the security cameras in the house. With this crucial discovery, they returned to the station to share their findings with the other investigators. Melissa remained very calm until they showed her the videotapes. The footage captured audio of an argument coming from the backyard of their house at 4:31 a.m. A female voice, likely Melissa's, could be heard saying, "Stay down." Just seconds later, the sound of glass breaking was audible, followed by the same voice saying, "So just die already." Over the next few minutes, the situation escalated with the woman repeating, "I hate you," and "Get up now" several times. Then came the sound of slaps and what might have been a man's voice, though it was unintelligible. Around 444, the female voice screamed, "No," and a minute later said something unclear, but to the investigators it sounded like, "What have I done?" The most chilling part was the videos from the house's security cameras. It showed Matthew walking very calmly while Melissa followed, hunched over and visibly angry. Although the image wasn't very clear, it was evident that it was them. What caught the officers' attention most was the visible blood on Melissa's hand, leading them to theorize that she had injured herself while stabbing her fiancé. After watching the tape, Melissa was speechless. Initially, she claimed not to remember having any argument, but as hours passed, she realized she couldn't keep lying and had to tell the real story, or at least what she claimed was the truth. She recounted that she was sleeping when Matthew woke her up in a state of drunkenness, which infuriated her. They started arguing and she reproached him for still drinking at 4 in the morning. The fight escalated and moved to the kitchen. There, Matthew threw a knife on the counter and began strangling her. Scared and thinking he was going to kill her, Melissa grabbed the knife from his hand and stabbed him in the back to escape. She also explained that, after the fight, she tried to clean the house and realized they had broken some glass. While picking it up, she cut her hand, which supposedly explained her injury. The detectives found this story highly suspicious, and everything became even stranger when the autopsy results arrived. The autopsy revealed that Matthew had a defensive wound on his right forearm, a large laceration on his chest, a small cut on his right shoulder, and a significant wound on his back from a stab. The medical examiner indicated that the cause of death was an incision in the arm that perforated the cephalic vein. It was entirely impossible for him to be more injured than Melissa if he had started the fight, as she only had the cut on her hand. That same day, Melissa was arrested for second-degree murder and taken to jail, where she would await trial without bail. When Matthew's family learned what had happened, they were devastated. His brother and his fiancée quickly expressed their suspicions to the police. They said that Melissa had isolated Matthew long before killing him, recounting how she had distanced him from all his loved ones and insisting she was far from an innocent girl. They believed she had manipulated the young man who, according to them, was an excellent person. Whether this was true or a complete lie would be determined in court. The trial began on February 14, 2022, 2 years after Matthew's death. Melissa continued to be charged with murder. Her lawyer argued that it was a case of self-defense, claiming that Melissa had suffered abuse in the relationship and only committed the crime to protect herself. The assistant district attorney did not believe this version. He was convinced that she was drunk and that the situation had gotten out of hand. He suggested that Melissa might have been frustrated with her partner's alcoholism, which led her to harm him. Melissa took the stand and, through tears, declared that she loved Matthew and never intended to harm him. She claimed that he had tried to kill her and that she was only trying to stop him. She also spoke about Matthew's drinking problems, stating that on that night, his blood alcohol level was 5 times the legal limit in Florida, a situation that had occurred on previous occasions. Sometimes he had even experienced hallucinations, staring fixedly at a corner and telling her that the devil was standing right there. Regarding Matthew's mental health, she said he had mistreated her several times and suffered from depression, but refused to seek help, not wanting to tell even his family. Lastly, Melissa spoke about the day of the crime, saying she didn't know how Matthew ended up with so many injuries on his body. She only remembered stabbing him once in the back to free herself from being strangled. Melissa's mother also defended her in court, explaining that her daughter had never been a troublesome person and always tried to avoid problems by hiding her pain. Despite these statements, there were many testimonies indicating that Melissa did not appear to have acted in self-defense. One key piece of evidence was the police report showing that the emergency call was made almost 4 hours after the stabbing occurred, which was evident from the time on Matthew's watch that tracked his heart rate. When the first responders arrived, Melissa initially claimed she had no idea what had happened to her boyfriend, only stating that she found him in the backyard. Her first mistake was lying in that statement. Matthew's mother took the stand to defend her son's memory, calling Melissa's story fabricated and expressing that her statements hurt as much as the crime itself. She addressed her former daughter-in-law directly, saying they both knew Matthew was the best thing that had ever happened to her, and that if he were there, the sentence Melissa was about to receive would have caused him great distress. However, none of these statements were as valuable as the video footage. An audio expert testified that the audio had been enhanced, making it clear that the couple argued and that Melissa verbally abused Matthew. Melissa's lawyer tried to defend her again, arguing that the audio had been manipulated. He found it suspicious that his client's voice was so loud while Matthew's was only a murmur, suggesting it had been edited to amplify the volume and make the shout seem much worse. Nevertheless, he acknowledged that Melissa could be heard in the footage saying things like, "I hate you, get up and die." He also admitted that there were sounds resembling slaps. The prosecution countered that the recording had not been altered and that there was no doubt Melissa would be convicted. On February 18, 2022, the much-anticipated day arrived for Matthew's family. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before reaching a decision. The judge rejected the self-defense claim, and Melissa was found guilty of second-degree murder. During the session, a juror remarked that he believed Melissa had lost her mind, noting that she knew Matthew would die after the attack, but still didn't call the police or an ambulance. On March 18th, a month after the verdict, Melissa returned to court for her sentencing. She received 20 years and 5 months in prison, which she would serve in a Florida state prison. The victim's family celebrated the decision. Matthew's sister-in-law stated that justice had been served, only to a certain extent. Matthew's brother expressed how much he missed his brother, saying he was a good guy who was just starting to become a man. The reality is that we'll never know what would have happened if the two young people had separated. But one thing is certain. Melissa decided to kill Matthew without remorse. In June 1980, Holly and Campelia, a native of New Jersey, vanished following a period of poor mental health. Holly had been battling with mental issues since high school, but she became increasingly erratic when she got to college. One fateful day on her way to a counseling appointment, she jumped out of her mother's car and was never seen again. All her family knew at the time was that she hitchhiked to Sacramento. After sending her family one letter, Holly stopped contacting them. Immediately after her disappearance, her parents, Augustine and Sally Campiglia, reported her missing. But unknowingly to them, her name was accidentally removed from the National Missing Persons Database. Meanwhile, in August 1980, the body of a 21-year-old woman was discovered in a cornfield off Seavers Road in Dixon, not far from the location of the current Pedrick produce market. She was dressed in a green wool sweater despite the summer heat and had been shot in the head numerous times. Detectives at the time had no idea that the woman's name had unintentionally been erased from the National Missing People database just 2 weeks prior. The victim and her murderer could not be identified, and so she was dubbed Dixon Jane Doe for 12 years. In 1992, when Augustine and Sally Campiglia got to know that their daughter Holly and Campiglia had accidentally dropped from the missing persons database used by law enforcement, they contacted the officials to re-add her name into the database. 5 weeks later, the Campiglias were informed by Solano County detectives that they had a match. Holly Ann was their Dixon Jane Doe. This was heartbreaking news for Holly's family. In an interview, her mother Sally sadly said, "I just kept hoping she would show up one day with grandchildren. But with each year, I'd lose a little hope." Even though Holly Ann could now be laid to rest properly, neither her family nor the police knew what had happened to her. The investigation was abandoned until 2021, when Holly Ann's relatives contacted the police to inquire about the possibility of using modern forensic methods to identify Holly Ann's killer. Investigators got to work, and a male's DNA was found after evidence samples of the crime scene were sent for testing. In 2023, investigators from the Solano County Sheriff's Office declared that they think the DNA belongs to Herman Lee Hobbs, who is currently 76 years old and serving a sentence at a prison in Chowchilla. According to research, Herman Lee Hobbs had been a violent criminal throughout his adult life. In 1969, when he was 22 years old, he was accused of carrying out more than a dozen armed robberies across the Sacramento region. Hobbs admitted to being the serial robber and consented to plead guilty after leading police on a wild car chase. However, when it was time for his sentence, the 6'5" mechanic attempted to flee the courthouse and had to be tackled and subdued by a CHP officer. Herman Lee Hobbs' time behind bars for armed robbery was brief. He was back on the streets by 1975. He relocated to Rio Linda, a street away from Terry Pata, a 13-year-old junior high school student. One day in January 1975, Terry Pata was sent home from school early due to her having nausea and a headache. She, however, never made it home. 9 days later, her body was discovered nearby, placed inside a drain pipe. She had been raped and fatally stabbed. At the time, no suspect was ever found. Years of sexual assault by Herman Lee Hobbs weren't made public until 2000. He was convicted of raping a 15-year-old girl in Yuba County that year. When Hobbs was taken into prison, his niece and daughter came forward to express concerns that he might be responsible for the deaths of numerous children. This tip led investigators to Terry Pata's long-suppressed murder. When DNA from Terry Pata's crime scene was examined, it matched Hobbs. Hobbs, who was already serving a lengthy jail sentence for rape, pled not guilty to Terry Pata's murder and was given a further 25 years to life sentence. This was just the start. That same year, some loggers discovered a woman's skull in the Yuba County foothills. Through DNA testing, the remains were identified as 29-year-old Brenda and Tucker, who vanished from her house in the area of Oroville in 1994. Hobbs was known to Brenda Tucker's loved ones. In the 1990s, he had occasionally even stayed at their home. Hobbs was accused of killing Tucker, but a court eventually dropped the charges in 2002 owing to a lack of proof. In 2023, after his DNA was a match to the DNA at Holly and Campiglia's crime scene, Solano County investigators had Hobbs moved to the Justice Center Detention Facility in Fairfield. He is being charged with first-degree murder. According to the Solano County Sheriff's Office, investigators are collaborating with other organizations in Northern California to find any additional potential victims of Herman Lee Hobbs. Thanks for diving into another mystery with us. If you enjoyed unraveling the clues and chasing the truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling cases and deep dives into the unknown.